We as Kenyan men, like all men everywhere on earth, are fully capable of delivering fresh hell to our women in all sorts of ways. And in doing so, we make life really difficult for our girls, even to the point of really splitting our families. Unfortunately, in many cases, the blame almost always comes back to the woman, regardless of whether they had a role in it or not. And just like Mr. Adam in the Bible, uh, I don't remember the exact wordings when he was caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He simply told God that, it was this woman that you gave me. It almost always comes back to the woman. Now, certainly in every community, there are really good men, probably the majority of men, and there are also terrible men and people in between. And this is certainly true among Kenyan-American men that I've met over the years that I've lived here. However, I want to be very clear that there's a big difference between a good man who makes a mistake here and there versus a terrible human being who gets it right on occasion. Those two are very different human beings. And while we'd like to make such distinctions, it's helpful to note that the average person generally is good. But no matter how good you are, you're going to make mistakes here and there, which is why I always say, make sure you know the difference between a good man that occasionally makes a mistake and a terrible man who occasionally gets it right. So I don't believe that people can be right or wrong necessarily as a function of the country from which they come, because that is just not true. In the same breath, I know that there are very, very good Kenyans that I've met here in the US. And I wouldn't say that these men are necessarily good because they are from Kenya. Just like men in every other country, people, whoever they are, and they can be good or bad depending on many, many things other than coming from a particular place. So in this video, as we do the cleaning in our kitchen, I will talk to you about how Kenyan American men, some of them good humans, end up really terrorizing our girls, especially spouses and the significant others that we live with. Now, all that I'm going to share is really based on my personal experience, my observations, and some of the things that are already publicly out there. But before we unpack this topic, I really want to thank you again, our viewers, for coming back to watch our videos. If you're new, we are filming from Karateng, which is an amazing village in Kisumu. This is in the western part of Kenya. And in this video, I'm simply taking time to teach my supervisors how to properly wash dishes. It's funny that every place I've lived in America, I've always had a dishwasher, and I don't think I've ever used a dishwasher to clean dishes. I know how to use it, but it never even occurs to me. So we just do it manually. This is a very common Kenyan thing. And so I want to make sure that my supervisors know how to manually clean dishes, and so they'll be a part of this process with me for the next 10 minutes. So if you have not subscribed, I encourage you to watch this video and subscribe. But even if you don't subscribe today, I hope you'll return and watch as a regular viewer. So let's start by highlighting some of the things that I hear, some good things that I hear about Kenyan men. Number one, a lot of our ladies say that most Kenyan men are really good with kids. A lot of us are involved right from the hospital when, in fact, even before the hospital, from pregnancy, all the way to when the kid leaves the house to their own house. Most Kenyan men are really involved with schools, hospitals, doctor's appointments, and all that. That's usually what I see. Certainly, there are exceptions. Now, many Kenyans work really hard. A lot of folks actually have multiple jobs, hustle many, many hours. And a lot of this is geared towards our instinct to be providers, because we are very comfortable working to pay bills, taking care of business, paying for stuff. The majority of the Kenyans I know do that. And the folks that I know, of course, are also very good with finances. Not wild spenders, budget fairly well. But like I said, there are exceptions here and there. And then those who own homes, many of them are very handy in terms of fixing stuff. If there's a leak somewhere, cutting lawns, trimming fences, painting work, and things like that. The Kenyan men that I know are really handy in terms of getting things done at home. And the list is much longer. So while I'm going to talk about how we deliver hell, I want you to remember that a great majority of the Kenyan men I know are excellent human beings that do well, that often makes mistakes here and there, like myself. So here are some of the things that I hear about us from our sisters that really, really are terrible. Number one is that a lot of us struggle with control. And I'll explain to you why I think many of us do that. But sometimes you hear a woman complain that, oh, I can't go to school, or I can't get this new job because my husband says this and that and all that. Some of us may have a stronger desire to control than necessary. And that may influence what our wives do, what our kids do, how money is spent, and just how things run in the house. Unfortunately, that is true for many of us. Not all, but many of us struggle with that. When it comes to the kitchen, many of the folks that I know are not very good cooks, myself included. I try to cook, but I know I don't rank in the top 5 in those who cook, at least in my house. So a lot of us are not good at that, but I've met quite a few Kenyans who are amazing, amazing cooks. Now, one of the accusations that has been leveled against us is polygamy. And I'm using polygamy in its most loose sense, to include anything from just mere flirting all the way to cases where you find a man has a legal wife in the US and has a second wife that is not known somewhere back at home. So they go back and forth between the two wives, or even locally where folks have side dishes here and there. That happens in every community, but even in the Kenyan community, I've seen quite a few of those. And then, of course, I hear accusations about Kenyan men being too close to their mothers than their other family members. And this is interesting because I think when people marry, it happens that the woman joins the man who already has existing long-term relationships with their siblings and parents. And so negotiating that arrangement can be difficult. I've seen cases where some folks would rather begin by discussing some things with their siblings first before they talk to their wives. And this is a challenging thing for wives. For us men, we don't have to worry about it because we are not often as close to our wives' relatives. But yes, we have been accused of being too close to our families in ways that can really interfere with the functioning of the house. In fact, I've seen cases where a man takes so much of their family income, spends it on the family to the point where he can't meet the immediate family needs, that is the wife and the children's need, because they're focusing so much on their siblings. This is true, and it is a big problem in our community. And then, of course, we've been accused of being secretive, where there are some things that our friends would know way more than our spouses. I don't know where that thing came from, but a lot of men operate in spaces where your best friends would know a whole lot more than your wife. And then the issue of abuse is a very common one, whether you're talking about emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, stalking. It happens in our community more often than you'd realize. And so while I may not give examples here to protect people's identity, I've seen almost every single one of these within our Kenyan community. And then we've also been accused of being very rigid to change. And I think it's one of my struggles as well. I am very much set in my ways on some things. And so it takes a lot for me to change. That can make life difficult because our sisters, at least the ones that I know, are very good with adjusting to change. So many of us can be relatively rigid, and that can bring problems. Again, I'm talking about even rigidity in terms of belief systems. When you meet something new, how do you respond to that? That can be a big problem. And then small things like we fear pain. Like in my case, if I cut my finger, I may need my wife to take me to the ER, and then we need a bandage, and then I need like 2 weeks off, and then I'm not cleaning dishes. Or when I have like a small cold, she needs to prepare some warm tea, and I'm really sick. Something that our sisters consider very little, for us, we are simply dying. So we fear pain. I hear that. And then, of course, a few of us have issues with a sense of entitlement, especially in cases where we have played a role in supporting our spouses. I see this particularly in cases where a man brings a young woman from Kenya, supports them through school, they do well, and then once the young woman is done with school, then we feel entitled to tell them how things are supposed to operate, especially in terms of finances. It's almost like we think our wives owe us their lives because we supported them through school. And it's really sad because it ends up putting a person in a situation where you're treating your spouse more like a child. And in fact, when they were receiving help, there was no agreement as to who is supposed to do what and what entitles you to anything. So that sense of entitlement really can be such a problem. So I've seen it with spouses or even people that we help to come to the US. Once we help them, we feel entitled to gain favors from them. And we lord it over them to the point where some of us will actually remind you for the rest of your life that we gave you $10 when you had nothing 1,000 years ago. So the sense of entitlement that I've seen can be really problematic in our community. So I'm sure folks have seen a lot more than I'm listing here. So feel free to share some of the issues we struggle with. Maybe this might be a forum for us to learn, because one of the challenging things for us as humans is the capacity for self-reflection. Because we all think in our heads that we are good human beings, even when we really are not. I don't think I've met a person who admits that they're just terrible. And so self-reflection can be a challenge. And this is where we are going to depend on our sisters to tell us the things we struggle with. And hopefully through these conversations, we can learn to do better. Because as a community, I don't know if we've developed some really good mechanisms for addressing the issues I'm talking about. And because of that, I see different generations of men, because I've lived here for almost 2 decades. I have friends, some of whom are in their 20s, and I have friends, some of whom are in their 70s and 80s. You see almost identical issues across different generations. And that simply means, clearly, we have not figured out a solution to some of these problems. So here's why I think we struggle with the issues I've listed. Number one, a big factor in my view is cultural socialization, where back in Kenya where we were raised to think that men are supposed to behave a certain way. And then we go to churches where we are told the man is the head of the household. And unfortunately or fortunately for us, almost all of us end up marrying really smart women. Many of them are actually smarter than us. And so when you've been taught that you need to be the head and you're heading somebody who's actually smarter than you, then you run into issues. So our cultural socialization in terms of the role of a husband or the role of a man can be problematic. There's parts of it that are wonderful, especially how we are socialized to take care of our families. That's really wonderful. But then when we don't realize that it's important to work with our partners, perhaps as equal, that can be a problem. The second part, as I mentioned earlier, many of us really struggle with adjusting. And I wonder whether it's a function of gender or sometimes maybe just because we are older. Because typically we are usually older than our wives. And then, of course, the role models that we see at home are the ones that teach us the things that you see us do. Because we grew up with fathers doing the exact same thing. Then we see mothers who live in lifestyles that encourage things like that. I often tell my mother that her generation is the generation of ndoa ni kuvumilia, ndoa ni kuumia, which means marriage is for suffering. Now that's a different generation. And so the role models we see don't exactly present a picture that allows us to be better spouses in America. And then, of course, the spouses that we end up marrying, particularly the Kenyan women that are raised in Kenya that we live with, some of them also reinforce the behaviors that we bring in because they were also socialized in the same environment where they are taught to accept suffering, that suffering is normal. So when they live with us, they sometimes allow us to do things that I don't think we should be doing, unfortunately. So I'm not putting the blame here on women, but that can also contribute to the problem. So if you're raising a Kenyan man or if you're living with a Kenyan man, here's some few things I might suggest for you to think about. Number one, for young kids, as best as you can, please blur the lines, the gender lines that they are in terms of how people live at home so that they don't grow up with very distinct gender roles. And then when you get married, please make sure that from day one, you set expectations and you stick to it. Unfortunately, many Kenyan women get married and they want to be goat wife the first couple of years. So they wake up, they cook, they clean, they do everything. 2 years down the line, they are so burnt out and then they want to change things. You can still change it, but it's going to be really difficult. So please set your expectations day one and stick to it. Then us will just roll with what you've set up. And of course, Make sure you talk about family relationships. And this is always an ongoing relationship. What does this mean in terms of the wife, the husband, and the husband's siblings? Negotiate all of that. It's an ongoing conversation. And I honestly hope that you find the kind of man you desire, because it's very difficult to change a grown man. It's really difficult. Well, I wish you all the luck out there, those of you who are stuck with us, Kenyan men, and I will see you in the next. Thank you.